Israel steps up strikes on Gaza ahead of a ground assault, while Prime Minister Netanyahu faces a possible war on two fronts as tensions rise with Lebanon.
The UN confirms a second convoy of 14 trucks carrying humanitarian aid has entered Gaza via the Rafah crossing.
Tens of thousands of people across Europe rally in support of Israelis and Palestinians as fighting in Gaza continues.
Israel continued to shell Gaza overnight after vowing to intensify airstrikes on the enclave in preparation for a looming ground assault. It warned Palestinians remaining in the north of the Strip to flee south. At a security meeting in Tel Aviv, Israel's defense minister said their war against Hamas could last months, but insisted it will be the last.
כך חודש, חודשיים, שלושה, אבל בסוף לא יהיה חמאס. דבר השני, האויב צריך לפגוש לפני שהוא פוגש את כוחות השריון והחי"ר, הוא צריך לפגוש את הפצצות שלו.
However, the fight against Hamas threatens to ignite a war on multiple fronts. Early on Monday, the Israeli military struck 2 Hezbollah cells in Lebanon. Officials say the group was planning to launch anti-tank missiles and rockets into their territory. Earlier, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned the militant group that getting involved would be the mistake of its life. As Israel amasses troops at the Gaza border, the situation in the occupied West Bank is also devolving. Israeli forces have closed crossings into the territory and checkpoints between cities, measures they say are aimed at preventing attacks. According to Tel Aviv, since October 7th, more than 700 Palestinians were arrested, including 480 suspected Hamas members. Meanwhile, Palestinian authorities say 93 people have been killed in the West Bank since Hamas's attacks, in clashes with Israeli troops, arrest raids, and in attacks by Jewish settlers. The EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, reiterated the UN's calls for a ceasefire on Monday to allow for more aid trucks to enter Gaza. This comes after a second convoy of 14 vehicles carrying crucial aid entered the Strip on Sunday. An initial 20 trucks carrying essential supplies crossed the Egyptian border on Saturday. The UN says the latest convoy provides, quote, a small glimmer of hope for Palestinians, but warned they still need much more. Since the 7th of October, Israel has bombarded Gaza while cutting off access to supplies such as food, water and electricity. Israeli defense forces have been checking the convoys for any possible weapons that could be used by the Hamas militant group and still refuse to let fuel into Gaza. Despite requests from human rights organizations to grant access to at least 100 trucks a day, Tel Aviv claims the humanitarian situation is, quote, under control.
At least 5,700 people have been killed in Israel and Gaza in the 2 weeks since Hamas launched an attack on Israel. The conflict is polarizing Europeans. In the German capital, tens of thousands of people joined a rally in support of Israel.
Ich bin heute hier, ein Zeichen zu setzen gegen Antisemitismus, gegen Israel-Hass und für die Diversität von jüdischem Leben in Deutschland und überall.
Protesters in Paris called for the release of people kidnapped by the Hamas fighters in Israel. On Saturday, they freed 2 of the 210 hostages on what they say was humanitarian grounds. The majority of rallies held in Europe have been in support of the Palestinian people. Israel says it's targeting Hamas locations. The airstrikes, however, have killed more than 4,300 citizens.
Un cessez-le-feu est crucial, parce qu'en fait, un cessez-le-feu, ça arrête les morts. Après, on peut parler des solutions, de ce qui se passe après, mais au jour d'aujourd'hui, on doit arrêter une crise humanitaire à Gaza, on doit arrêter les bombardements israéliens des hôpitaux, on doit arrêter le déplacement de plus de centaines de milliers de Palestiniens vers le sud de Gaza, où d'ailleurs ils ne sont pas protégés non plus, ça a été prouvé dans les derniers jours. Donc voilà, aujourd'hui on appelle déjà à l'urgence à un cessez-le-feu.
Rallies have also been held across Austria, where demonstrators called for peace in Gaza. They also paid tribute to victims of both sides of the war.
1 year ago, Italy's new far-right and Eurosceptic government raised concerns among European democracies. So what assessment can be made of the first year of the Italian Prime Minister? Has Giorgia Meloni succeeded in dispelling her neo-fascist label?
Sicuramente c'è stato un tentativo di smarcarsi dall'etichetta neofascista. Il tentativo mi sembra solo parzialmente riuscito.
Over the past year, Gianfranco Pellegrino says Meloni's domestic policy appears to have aligned with her far-right ideology.
Le tre misure più importanti sui diritti civili sono state il rendere la GPA un reato universale, avere favorito in qualche maniera che i prefetti non riconoscessero in maniera automatica i figli nati da GPA che venivano dall'estero, e le recenti misure sulla natalità. Meloni ha detto molto chiaramente che le donne che hanno più di 2 figli danno un contributo alla società. C'è l'idea che la famiglia naturale, che deriva dalla coppia eterosessuale, è la cellula fondamentale della società. Famiglie che sono fatte da coppie di persone di sesso dello stesso sesso, oppure famiglie che sono fatte da un solo genitore, oppure persone che decidono di non avere figli. Queste persone dovrebbero venire discriminate, hanno di fronte allo Stato un valore inferiore.
In foreign policy, Meloni has juggled between distancing herself from the anti-EU sentiment that marked her political career and maintaining alliances with far-right countries.
Il suo obiettivo fondamentale è stato proprio quello di consolidare un'immagine affidabile, diversa da quella che era stata dipinta dai media internazionali. La situazione potrebbe essere descritta in questi termini: l'Italia ha bisogno dell'Europa tanto quanto l'Europa ha bisogno dell'Italia. Meloni ha dovuto trovare un modo di lavorare con le istituzioni europee e viceversa le istituzioni europee hanno dovuto sforzarsi per lavorare con Meloni.
The same ambiguity has been evident in her immigration policy.
L'accoglienza generosa verso gli ucraini è un caso straordinario di doppio discorso sull'immigrazione e sull'asilo. I rifugiati di certe guerre, Afghanistan, Siria e altri paesi del sud del mondo, dell'Africa, quelli non vanno bene, non ci piacciono, non suscitano moti di solidarietà.
So how can we summarize the first 12 months of Giorgia Meloni's premiership?
Mi sembra un anno di passi indietro sul piano del rispetto dei diritti umani e della solidarietà.
Victory for the Swiss People's Party after Switzerland's parliamentary elections on Sunday. Securing 28.6% of the votes, the right-wing populist party achieved one of its best historic results, securing 62 out of the 200 seats in the National Council. In second place came the Swiss Socialist Party with 18% of the ballots and 2 seats more than in 2019. In contrast to their rise 4 years ago, the Greens finished with 9% of the votes and lost 5 seats in the lower house.
In one of the UK's poorest coastal communities, the spotlight once again rests on the Bibby Stockholm barge, a 222-room, 3-storey boat chartered by the UK government for 18 months, which docked in July and is now deemed safe again. The UK Home Office has begun moving migrants back on board after they were removed following the discovery in August of Legionella bacteria. Here, on the Isle of Portland, it's a controversial issue.
It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think it makes sense to most people who really have any kind heart for other human beings, really.
I think most people are afraid of the sort of demographic that it is, which is men, single men, and that's really it.
They should process asylum seekers properly, and if their claim is valid, then they should be integrated into our community. I don't agree with keeping them as prisoners.
As the debate surrounding the backlog of asylum seekers in the UK continues, the Bibby Stockholm, which will eventually be home to a total of 500 men, is seen as part of a potential solution by the government. But the backlog of asylum seekers is big. 175,000 people are waiting to be processed.
A barge in a port on private property behind these barriers, intended to show there was no luxury in the UK's asylum process. But as well as Legionella bacteria, a type of pneumonia being found on board, concerns were also raised about fire safety and about far-right activity in the area. But the UK government says the barge is now safe again and will reduce the cost of keeping asylum seekers in hotels.
I think it's an interesting strategy, but I'm not sure how comfortable the local people are having the barge sat there with that big group of people.
There's lots of people coming over, being assessed as to whether they're economic migrants or refugees. I guess there's a backlog. People need to go somewhere. I'm not sure if this is the right place where they need to go, but they need to go somewhere.
A second judicial review claim has been issued in the UK's High Court to challenge the government's decision. But the UK Home Office says it's confident the barge will house asylum seekers safely and securely.
Reigning champion Max Verstappen produced a superb performance to claim victory at the United States Grand Prix in Austin on Sunday. This was the Dutch driver's 50th career victory and his third consecutive triumph on this particular track. Verstappen proved too strong for Lewis Hamilton, who had to settle for second place but was later disqualified. Lando Norris finished third, completing the podium. This outstanding victory adds another chapter to Verstappen's already illustrious career and sees him equal his own record of 15 victories in a single season.
Author Salman Rushdie has accepted the prestigious Peace Prize at the German Book Trade in Frankfurt. The award recognises his dedication to free speech in spite of lifelong threats and violence. Rushdie hired permanent security after being sentenced to death in 1989 by then Ayatollah Khomeini for his novel Satanic Verses. In accepting the award, Rushdie called for the defence of freedom of expression and the preservation of peace.